All right, century of Imperial War. What do we mean by that? Well, starting way back in the late 1600s, but we're really going to be focusing on the 1700s. Starting in the late 1600s, Britain is fighting with New France. The British colonies are fighting with the French colonies in the New World. Now, on the British side, they had more soldiers than the French, and that has a lot to do with the fact that they have more people in the New World. For the French, they have a stronger Indian alliance, which means they have more support from their Indian allies. The French people are more unified than the people in the 13 British colonies, and their population centers are more concentrated. They need to defend Quebec. They need to defend Montreal. But other than that, they don't have large areas of people that they can't afford to lose. So where there are large numbers of French, they are more concentrated. So we have King William's War and Queen Anne's War. King William's War in 1688 to 1697, and Queen Anne's War 1702 to 1713. And in King William's War, this is a war between England and France, and during that war, there were Canadian raids on New York and Massachusetts. So the French came down from Canada and attacked the English settlers in New York and Massachusetts. In Queen Anne's War, there's even more suffering, again, on the American frontier. It's not people on the coast that are being attacked, it's people on the frontier. That fighting is going to continue in the 1700s. It's going to continue, and the British and the French are fighting for control of what was considered the West at that time, which is basically the Mississippi Valley, the area around the Mississippi River, out into the Midwest and around the Mississippi River. The French had claimed Louisiana. So with the French and the British, the French more in the West and the English more in the East, the group that's getting squeezed out are the Native Americans. They're stuck in the middle and really feeling pressure from both of these colonial powers on both sides. In 1744 to 1748, we have another war between the British and the French, known as King George's War. And during King George's War, we have a major victory in Canada. The colonial troops score a major victory by capturing the French-Canadian city of Louisbourg. This proves that colonial troops are militarily competent, that they can stand on the battlefield and defeat European powers. However, Louisbourg is returned to the French in the treaty. It's given right back to the French in exchange for some islands in the Caribbean. This does not help the American colonists. It helps the British Empire, but it really makes the Americans kind of confused and start to realize that their goals may not always be the same as the goals of the whole British Empire. During King George's War, the French claimed the Midwest, so that's Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana. The French took control of that area, and right at the spot where modern-day Pittsburgh is found, the French built a fort, Fort Duquesne. The Virginians tried to push the French out of this region. So a group of Virginians led by a young George Washington, attacked the French at Fort Duquesne and were soundly defeated. They're soundly defeated by the French. What this proves, what this shows the colonists, is that if they are going to beat a European power, they need to work together. So, in 1754, in Albany, New York, a meeting was held. And a meeting of representatives from a number of colonies came together to discuss how to deal with the Iroquois. And Benjamin Franklin proposed what's called the Albany Plan. And this would be a plan for what he called a Grand Council, which would basically be a union between all the colonies. Delegates would be elected, the president would be selected by the king, and they could deal with the common defense of the colonies. They could deal with things like Western expansion, which was becoming contentious between the colonies. And they could deal with the Indian affairs as a group rather than individuals. Most importantly, they would have the power to collect taxes for defense. People really liked the idea. However, for it to ever succeed, for ever to start, it would need the support of two groups, the colonial assemblies and Parliament. The colonial assemblies did not want this because their most important power was the ability to collect taxes, and they weren't going to give someone else the power to collect taxes. Parliament didn't want it because they thought that it undermined their power, and they're not going to do anything that's going to make them seem weaker. The next war that we'll talk about is the 7 Years' War, which starts in 1756. This is mainly a push by the British to get the French out of Ohio and the Mississippi Valley. That's what's happening in America during the 7 Years' War. Americans did not want to have to pay for and fight in another British war. All of these British wars had been very expensive, had led to high taxes on the Americans. And the British did not really have strong political leadership to get people motivated to fight this war at this time. We have a change in leadership in Britain. In 1756, William Pitt takes over as the Prime Minister of Britain, and he has a new strategy. Rather than fighting France in Europe and in the New World, he says, let's just fight the French in America. And also, this is probably the most important to us, he says, don't ask the colonists to pay for it, at least not up front. The result is Britain wins. And Britain, as a result of the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, it's the same thing, Britain gets Canada, Florida, and all the land east of the Mississippi. Louisiana is going to temporarily go to Spain. France is left with basically nothing in continental North America. And the French Canadians, many of whom are Catholic, now become subjects of England. And also, the 7 Years' War leads to a dramatic increase in American pride, in English pride, and in Protestant pride. All of these changes in land ownership take place as part of that Treaty of Paris, 1763. The colonists gain a valuable experience of cooperating and working with each other. They also met their fellow colonists and learned about colonies other than their own. And we also see during the 7 Years' War some significant on-the-job training for American military leaders like George Washington. However, the British are left feeling like the Americans were a little ingracious, upset with the Americans for dragging their feet on paying the bill for this defense. However, the Americans felt like they weren't getting enough respect and thank yous for the fact that they had supplied a lot of the troops. For example, 1 out of every 10 men in Massachusetts fought in the 7 Years' War.